Indeed, we have begun. We will continue more or less. Just very introductory, as first lectures inevitably are. Today, we'll probably get through the rest of this first chapter as introductory. That really the focus points. Homeostasis is a wonderful state of internal balance that living have, and we're very, very well equipped for that. Whether it's warm or cold, we can. If it's a little chilly this morning, I threw on a sweater when I took the dog out for a walk early, as he insists. But it's very, very warm. About it. So we can adjust and sort of help our internal balance by making accommodations. Heat on, turn the AC on, whatever. But now we have to sort of see why it works on an internal basis. And that's really the focus point today. And the other things that I wrote down, and I have the world. Why? Give me a doctor in my prescription. Of course, we take prime handwriting. Only a pharmacist can. So, eukaryotic is the kind of cells that we have. The highlight film, as you will learn, ad infinitum. Membrane-bound organelles, including nucleus. That's what we're made of. We're made of cells. Some living things are single cells, some have a few cells, we have DNA and RNA. And it's important to understand that we have both. That's what makes sense. DNA, which has different responsibilities that we'll look at, and RNA, basically responsible, perhaps more so than anything else, the assemblage, for assembly of proteins that are there. DNA, really two roles, basically, telling what proteins to make, that's the whole genetic thing, and replication. So we can do something else that's farther down the line, reproduction. And so not all living things do sexual and asexual reproduction. Indeed, probably most living things do asexual reproduction. So, and sexual reproduction. So we do sexual to a limited extent, basically for the progeny. That's what we have. We have really a limited amount of expenditure, let's say, of energy of doing that over the course of our lifetime, as opposed to asexual reproduction, good old mitosis, which we do constantly. That we have to spend a lot of time eventually talking about when we get to cells. And again, I'll state it for the umpteenth time, and you'll continue to hear it. We don't repair ourselves, we replace ourselves by making more of the cells. We have to have boundaries, part of membrane-bound organelles. We have boundaries within the cell, and we have external boundaries ourselves. Okay. So living things have to have that, and means of getting things sort of in and out. In order to do all the stuff we do, we need energy. And so rather than use the more popular term, let's say, of metabolism, I call it energy transformations. So metabolism is the assembly of all reactions that occur, both reactions that really are into two parts. When we talk about metabolism, we have two types. Anabolism, basically building things, think anabolic steroids, and catabolism, think catastrophe, breaking things down. So build up, break down. Store energy basically is how we do this. And release energy. Really fairly simplistic, if you want to think of it that way. As part of the living things have it, yeah. When we have all this, yes, we have to, part of the boundaries I sort of included, we respond to, you might say stimuli, but I would think it would be better, changes in our environment. Living things do that either on a single cell basis, like bacteria. It's just a little bit more simplistic in the way they do it. It's really being attraction to the colony as opposed to us doing different changes, the reproduction, and then capacity for growth and development. So that's kind of the construct for living things, and that's what we're talking about here. all that stuff with building and the levels of organization, the organizational hierarchy, sort of the highlight film of yesterday in emerging properties is really where we are. And I mean, the whole idea from now, after, and that's what introductory chapters are about, introducing you to this, is to start to build it. Did you, some of you guys have lab yesterday? Wasn't that fun? Got a lot of work last night, lab reports and all that good stuff. That was fun. I don't envy you. Yeah, I watched a rare thing, the Pirates actually winning a game, and one that didn't require stress associated with it. Watch that. It was easy comparatively. Aha. So remember all this. Well, a couple of things. Why we begin to understand is because I know it doesn't seem like it's possible. I have been sitting in classes like that. Even most recently, I actually was when I decided to flip my career into teaching. I actually was taking classes because I was really thinking of doing high school teaching, which really would have never been for me. But I'm sitting there where you are when I was 50 years old with students your age, taking teaching classes, psych classes, and things like that. So, I mean, a lot of times, basically, when I walk into class and now you got this anatomy and physiology course in front of you, it's like, what does this have to do? Where's the application of all this down the road? And that's why we do this. And it's good, at least with some textbooks, and at least with my degree of expertise, such as it is, to show you the clinical relevance. In other words, where this works. That's the advantage I think I bring, because most of the students that I teach, certainly in these classes, taking anatomy and physiology, are pursuing what we call clinical careers. That's the definition of that, treating people in some way, shape, or form. And this is where you begin to see it. So here, I was just thinking about this. When you're looking at this, this is the circulatory system. The thing is densities. When we talk about what's a density, it's like how much stuff that you can stuff into a place. It's like if you have a box that's filled and packed tightly, it's very, very dense. You got a lot of stuff in a limited space, as opposed to having a big box and one thing in it. Then it's not very dense. Okay, that's really what density is. You can get technical about it and get the chemical or physical definition. If I look at this, that's a heart. It's a giant muscle, very dense. Blood vessels are hollow tubes, not very dense. And what's going in blood vessels? Fluid. Okay? And the fluid is fairly, it's fluid. If it was solid, it'd be big trouble. And when you get into the blood, you're going to see there's different things with regard to the fluid, etc. And that's where this clinical application, they talk about one. And both of these are very, very similar, although very, very different in how they're obtained. Ultrasound, which has been around for a long time, ultrasound has been being used therapeutically in physical therapy. It's high frequency sound waves. And when they go through structures and when they hit dense structures, they cause vibration. And that vibration translates to heat. So in physical therapy and rehabilitation, for years it was hot packs and ultrasound or whirlpool and ultrasound. If somebody came in with a sprain, with a bad knee, healing from a fracture, and we used that because the heat wouldn't be just on the surface, it would be inside, and it could generate, and heat generates increased circulation, and that translates to healing. So voila, in the computer age, magically out of nowhere, all of a sudden we could assess these signals because there's bounce back. I mean, it's like if you're familiar with how sonar works on a submarine, it's basically ultrasound. It shoots out sound waves, it goes off of objects of different densities, and they see a pattern. So whether it's on a submarine or whether it's on a destroyer, they're constantly shooting out ultrasound in the destroyer looking for submarines, which is job one of a destroyer. So that whole idea, we were able to take those sound waves and use computer algorithms and make an image, and voila, now we have ultrasound that we can use both diagnostically, therapeutically would be the DP. Diagnostically would be classically to looking at the development of the fetus, and certainly all the gender reveal stuff. I mean, something that's comparatively new. Okay, in the early days, we were using, and we still did, there was something called a Doppler. And, you see Doppler radar on TV and things like that. We had a Doppler, it was like a stethoscope, but it really had an ultrasonic device on the tip of it, and you can put it on blood, and they still do. So you can be able to hear the sounds of blood, and blood vessels. Blood that's flowing normally makes one sound. Blood that's flowing irregularly, like if there's a narrow blood vessel and a chance of making a clot, makes a different sound. So that's really where the application is. And what it's based on is different densities. And so surely there are different densities, whether you're a solid structure or a structure that's filled with liquid, like a blood vessel. MRIs, or magnetic resonance, have been around for a long time as well, but in a whole different context. Magnetic resonance is basically this. Effectively, something is sitting there and we spin magnets around it. And the magnet, that spinning of the magnet, imparts energy. And resonance is basically pushing those, the whole electron thing we'll get to a little bit. No, you don't have to memorize that stuff or anything like this. This is just informational, trying to give context, which is a good thing. And to some extent, it keeps you interested. Allow me to elucidate my teaching philosophy. If I'm not excited, why would you be? So if I'm sitting there reading magnetic resonance, magnetic field changes, alignment and spin of certain types of atoms provide high-resolution images of internal structures, such as the brain. Oh my. So we can do that, but what fun would that be? And again, this is the only profession in the world where you can have people sitting there and listening to bad jokes. And maybe occasionally they'll laugh. Nevertheless, magnetic resonance is basically you spin, and when something resonates, it excites the electrons, and when they stop being excited, they fall down and they release energy. A short course. Particularly what we use is protons. Protons, as you will come to learn if you don't already know, are hydrogen ions. Basically, it's a proton. And we're filled with them everywhere. And we can see patterns. Nearly 60 years ago, it was used strictly in organic chemistry to identify organic compounds. Okay, they took that, something that was very, very useful in a chemistry lab, and basically in the computer age, we're able to do a construct based on different resonating patterns and the accumulation of where certain organic compounds make certain things at certain times. And depending on where the resonance occurs, there are different levels. You can see whether there's fluids, and it's wonderful for soft tissue. We did the same thing with X-rays. It's called CT, okay, computerized tomography. In the early days, we did tomographs. Basically, you take an X-ray at 90, then you take another one, the part doesn't move, 90, 85, 80, 75, 70. You change the angle, you look at it, and you're trying to get a different idea. Now we've got the computer to do that. You go through that arch, if you've ever seen a CT scan, and then it basically is simultaneously doing those images, and it creates, again, with a computer algorithm. So that's the marriage of the modern computer technology with technology, or at least things that were available prior to that, to give you an idea. And so that's why we look at the anatomy, because if you know the anatomy, you know what it says. I mean, it's easy to read a report. And for most of you, it'll be reading the report. For some of you, it won't be. I mean, we have students, I know it's changed now, but in health careers, I know they're sort of marrying the imaging, the nuclear medicine program with regard to the health careers. And that's part of this, to understand this. It's really important. Okay, so unlocking the cell. We're all made of cells. That's cell theory 101. All cells are derived from previously existing cells, other than probably the first one, wherever that magically occurred. Okay, the internal environment. That's important. Like I said, externally, we can deal with things. Okay, we cover ourselves up with clothing, depending, or not so much, depending on an environment. We will alter our environment because we have the capability of doing it. Okay, so, but the internal environment is all about stability, and it's all about set points. So, what's a temperature? If everybody we had, it would be easy to do. We could give everybody a digital thermometer, and you could take your temperature right now, write it down. That's a snapshot. You hear me say this a lot. They tested your blood sugar. It would be a snapshot. It varies throughout the day. If it's a little warm, it's going to change your internal temperature. If it's a little cold, not dramatically so. But if you were able to continuously monitor, and you certainly can, there's technology to do that, you can continuously monitor those things and see the variation. They go around the set point. What keeps it there? Okay, that's the magic of homeostasis. Various mechanisms that are basically providing information to your nervous and also your endocrine systems, which are your control systems, that kind of allow us to maintain that set point. And really, a lot of it has to do with the magical properties of water, which we'll get to, because we're basically big old bags of water, 70 to 80% water. Most of us are. Even if you're a little dehydrated, you're still a lot of water. Or if you're overhydrated, again, you're around a set point. And all of that is that magical word, homeostasis, which hopefully you've heard before, the maintenance of a constant internal environment. And yeah, cells depend on one another. They function, some of them function independently. Most of them function as an aggregate. Those tissues, those are just groups of cells that generally have a function based on how their group and what their construction is, and what we call it morphology, what their shape or appearance is. That are there, and the other capabilities that they have. Whereas, some function. So you'd have to have supportive cells for cells that are active to do things. If you take the bone marrow, bone marrow is really where all the blood cells are produced. So the bone marrow has a series of lining cells on the inside of your bones that's sort of draped over the interior of the bones, and it has the capability of producing a variety of different cells that kind of come from a common line. So if you're familiar with what a stem cell, there's a quote unquote, I think it's called a megakaryocyte or a megahemoblast. I always have to look those names up. Not that that's important to us when we get to the blood unit in AP2, you may be more important at that point. But all the cells come from that. Red cells, white cells, all the different kinds of white cells all come from that. So there's an interdependency on the bone marrow itself, on the structure of the bone, on various chemical factors that are coming from the circulation for that to happen properly. The most common problem that we have when people get something called anemia is iron deficiency. They're either not getting it in their diet, or there's other reasons that preclude the absorption of iron sufficiently, because iron is needed to make probably as famous a protein as there is, called hemoglobin. And that carries oxygen, and we got to have that to survive. Just little bits about that, and the interrelationship of structure and function, which you'll see ad nauseum. Different things. And it's neat the way they kind of throw this around, because again, it's basic understanding. All those energy transformations are great. We have to use it to store it and build things, whether it's more stuff. Maybe I told you, I probably did. And if I didn't, you're constantly replacing things. The bones you were born with, even though a lot of it was cartilage, have been replaced by your age basically twice. How's that? They're constantly being replaced. God, at my age, I don't even, my old bones are long gone. Not that funny. This is right. My wife keeps telling me your jokes are terrible. You're still using that same material you used years ago? I went, yes. She goes, no wonder they can't stand you. So there's nothing you're doing to me here that I don't get worse at home. And my kids are worse. Even my grandkids are worse. I have a soon to be 24-year-old granddaughter who's a mom of my grandson. And so when she was 9 or 10, she came over. I was living in an apartment at the time. I was between my two marriages. And she's like, oh, I have weekend. I'm watching her, blah, 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 blah. And she goes, oh, I'm going to grab a shower. Okay. And she goes, I don't want to. And I forgot my brush. I said, I have a hairbrush. She looked at me, why? 10-year-old granddaughter, give me a shot. Why do you need a hairbrush? It's just, that's honest truth. There's nothing you can do that haven't hit me yet. See, that one's fairly effective. Jokes that make fun of me, people appreciate. But self-deprecating trait. Nevertheless, that's what this is about. Cells moving from, this is the way we find ways to limit our expenditure of energy. The body is nothing, the body's not terribly lazy, it just doesn't like to use energy unless it needs to. So what does it do? It's the golden rule of how things move in and out of cells. Higher concentration to lower concentration. That's the driving force. So if we create what are called concentrations gradients, okay, in areas where there's permeability, meaning as we can get through that particular membrane or that particular structure, we generate energy. We even expend energy to generate energy. There's something you won't have to study, thankfully, with me, called the Krebs cycle. Well, maybe you've heard of it. Okay, it's not as complicated as it seems. It's a typical memorization thing. Effectively, what it does is it takes those hydrogen ions, those aforementioned proteins, and here's a permeable membrane, and basically it shoves them to the other side, massive amounts, and it creates a gradient because now you got a lot of protons on one side, relatively speaking, few on the other side, so they have a drive to come back across. And there's a neat structure that's almost like think of it as a biological turbine. When the protons come through, it spins it just like we would see a turbine at Niagara Falls with water power. As it spins, it generates energy. Why is that more efficient? Not only is a concentration gradient, it's a gradient with regard to charge. If you have a lot of positive charges here, relatively speaking, you have high positive and negative here. Opposites attract. And now that doubles the benefit. It's called chemiosmotic theory. It was worthy of a Nobel Prize. That's what we do in our body. In our kidneys, we are going to get rid of stuff we don't need. Sometimes early on in the kidneys, we suck it back in to create a gradient, and we do what's called co-transport. We kick it out the other side. Pretty good stuff. That's the magic. I mean, it's not stuff no one's going to ever ask you about it. I know I have a lot of students say, how is that going to make me a better nurse or a better this or a better that? I don't have a really good answer for that. But I think it enhances your understanding of the human body. And I think when you start to remember these things, every so often one of them helps you on a test. Every so often, and I emphasize this a lot, when you get into the point with many of you doing patient care, it's okay to say, I don't know. Don't BS them. I don't know, but I'll find out. It's a very good answer. People appreciate that. Nobody likes surprises, and everybody knows when you're trying. I don't want to use that BS word again. That would be inappropriate for class. It's all right. You'll catch me. It's okay. I'm trying to be better. Nevertheless, differentiation. So specialization of cells due to gene expression. Something we do not understand. It harkens back to that stem cell. Why is this mega whatever it is cell? I'm trying to remember what a fancy name of it is. Why is that magically becoming a platelet here, a white cell here, a leukocyte here, a neutrophil here, a lymphocyte here, basophil here? Why? And why is it becoming a red blood cell? Or why is it not? We don't understand. Why did all those wonderful cord blood tube cells magically change into, and why do we save them in the hopes that one day they will repair nerves or create different organs? We're not at that stage, but that's what stem cell technology is. That's why, and I'm sure you probably know somebody who has decided to save cord blood. Probably have. It has a lot of application. I mean, I think it's comparatively in their infancy. That's the idea of cell differentiation. We're going to look at that. Now, I don't know where you went with Dr. Robbins yesterday. Did he get into epithelial cells yet? He was talking about that. Those are relatively undifferentiated cells. What the magic about them is we make them all the time and we lose them all the time. Okay, they're coming off your skin all day long. They're cells that are lining your mouth. They're coming out all day long. Okay, they start at the bottom and they work their way to the top. There they go. Okay, they're easy to replace. Good news. They're highly replicative. Good news. Okay, when we say relatively undifferentiated, they're not that. They do very, very simple functions, and they do them very, very well. The more complicated they get, so they go from squamous, where they're basically just a giant membrane, maybe make a little fluid, to cuboidal, where now they get a little busier, they make thicker stuff, to columnar, where they make things like mucus. And the more advanced they are, you see them microscopically. So it's all good news. But the big problem is, because they replicate and they're, relatively speaking, not differentiated, they are the most common source of cancer. Nearly all cancers that trouble us come from lining cells, like epithelial cells. We even have a name for them. When you do connective tissue, I don't know if you did that yet. Okay, we have another name for it, because they're more organized, they're more highly differentiated. They have another kind of cancer that's less frequent, but more ominous. And nothing, any cancer is anything but ominous. They're called sarcomas. So breast cancer and prostate cancer, by far and away, other than skin cancer, I'll qualify that, the most common skin cancer being, probably 1 out of 5 of us gets skin cancer at some juncture during their life. Don't fret, most of the time something called the basal cell carcinoma. You'll get it when we do skin. Take it out. Generally, as you get older, you get those, exposure to sunlight, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Adenocarcinoma is what they are called in breast. And in prostate, they affect glands. Glands are very, very busy. So when you hear the term adeno, means gland, and then carcinoma means cancer. It's all because of the differentiation. When we get to this guy, those kind of cells, those are cardiac muscle cells. Muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells, smooth muscle cells are highly advanced. They've reached nearly an end stage of differentiation. Perhaps they have. Nerve cells are the same way. The good news is they don't get cancer. It would be extraordinarily rare, might be a way to say it. You hate to say never in science and in medicine. The bad news is we can't make more of them. The good news about those lining cells, we make them all the time. Scrape your skin. We all do it. What's going to happen? All of a sudden, it's going to get better. Like this thing, it's going to be better. It's getting better now. Okay. Doesn't take long. Okay. All of a sudden, you won't even know it was there. And the younger you are, it becomes even more rapid a process. That's like that. And so that's the good news. They repair quickly because they replace quickly. Again, we replace ourselves. We don't necessarily repair ourselves. The flip side of that is when one of these dies. Why would one of these die? Lack of blood supply. We have a word for that. It's called an infarction. That's vocabulary. Channeling my Mr. Rogers. I'll tell you the Mr. Rogers story. Death of tissue from lack of blood supply. Do not confuse that with an infection, which is caused by a microorganism like a virus or a bacteria. Parasite sometimes. So there's infarctions and infections. And infarctions specifically. So the problem with this is that there's a lack of blood supply. It dies and it's dead. And so what happens to it when it dies is replaced by scar tissue. If enough die, then at that point the heart may malfunction, and frequently does. We call it a heart attack. Okay. If you have a death of cardiac muscle from a lack of oxygen, it is a heart attack. Whether or not it is silent, whether or not it is immediately life-threatening, whether or not it's survivable, is all a matter of treatment. How much blood supply, what does it affect, how rapidly they get treatment, somebody gets their hands on one of those 80 guys over there. All that. Little stuff. So I mean, this is one of those stream of consciousness lectures. So moving on. That's differentiation. I'll just save it. It's all about semi-permeability. The whole membrane, the whole idea of this wonderful thing, and most of you learned about this, what we call the fluid mosaic model. That should be certainly ringing a bell. Okay, all it means, fluidity means it can to some extent change shape. They open and close. They're wonderful like that. Because I sort of touched on it a little bit last time. I might have ever mentioned fats aren't quite the same as macromolecules. Because they're not bonded together. It's not like they're stapled together. They can kind of open and close magically. That's fluidity. And what they are, the mosaic, are proteins that actually can move around. And those proteins are like little doorways, or they can create doorways because they can open and close. They can change shape. And when they open, sometimes they're open all the time. For water, let's say they're pores. So they're porous. On the other hand, some of them at signals will open, and the signal will make them close. Or the signal will make them open or close like that, depending on what it is, and stuff can come through. Based on concentration gradient, that stuff. Whether it fits properly, not everything can get through. They're very, very selective. Hence the name selective permeability. So not only are we made out of cells, by definition, the living membranes have to be selectively permeable. We don't have impermeable membranes. Living things do. So be aware of that. So, and reason I'm giving it relatively short shift, when we get to the cell, there's like 6 subsets of the proteins and what they do. Some are for attachment, some are for identification. I mean, that's one of the things you'll get to relatively early on. Protruding from those proteins, that's a tongue twister. Protruding from those proteins are, little carbohydrates, little short sugar chains that are there. They're your identity. It's the reason I have A pos, maybe somebody else has O neg, maybe someone else has O pos. All the different blood types, that's how our body identifies whether it's self or not self. Okay. Why some things can be transfused, why they can't. It's sort of and in a greater sense, it starts to be the basis of how we can do transplantation. And I mean, you're in transplant city here. Pittsburgh is a transplant, but for years it's a transplant center. It's the foundation of transplant. When Dr. Starzl came from Denver here, well, those many years ago, and started really creating this being a transplant center. Very, very fascinating. And so membranes, communication, cells talk to one another all the time. So good they have a heart muscle there. These guys are all interconnected. They send signals. I just contracted, now it's your turn. So they send charged particles. It's like that, the kids' game of telephone. And it's like, you can say something to her and she can say something. Boom, 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 boom. Even though the message might be slightly different by the end of the time, at least you could tell you contract. It's like they've gone back at the ball games and now they're doing the wave again. My question is, why? Nevertheless, that's the wave. So, we were 2 pirate games now. We haven't been to a winning pirate game in a couple of years. It's fireworks. What do you expect? Nevertheless, so that's what happens here. That little thing, got a fancy name, that juncture point that you'll learn about in AP2, it's called an intercalated disc. And it's really a very solid connection that we'll learn about that holds those cells, because they're constantly contracting and think they pull apart. But anatomically, they're specialized and they don't. And they have a lot of surface area and a lot of connections. It would be bad if your heart, every time you got excited and your heart rate went up, it would tear something. Not good. Let's see. We'll get the feedback in a sec, because that's really homeostasis. Balance, yeah. Lost substances, elimination of excesses. Yeah, I mean, happens to us all the time that are there. So, just think of it. What happens, because a lot of it's triggered by something called sodium. So if you run around and it's super hot, or doing a workout, maybe you didn't hydrate enough, you'll come back in and hydrate because your body has to replenish those fluids. Or maybe you overhydrated doing something else. And then all of a sudden now it's going to perspire and things like that. It's going to balance out those kinds of things. And yeah, energy keeps cells active. Duh. Boy, I could have written that. Did I mention about PowerPoints? Not to rely on them. Not just for me. PowerPoints are not subject to editorial review. Every time I see a PowerPoint, every time I look at them, if I see an error, I will call it to your attention. Don't go to anybody, any instructor, and say, oh, the PowerPoint said that. Doesn't work. Textbooks, scholarly articles are subject to editorial review. Yeah, that you can use that. So if you're going to try to argue back a point or say something like this, don't say the PowerPoint. Now, I will listen. Okay. You'll get to figure out who you can talk to and who you can't. It's a learning experience. I try to be low maintenance. Just giving it to you. Growth, yeah. We can increase in number, we can increase in size, and they can change. That's part of the interesting thing about we begin to see growth being more than just, again, maturation maybe involves some of those cells going from very, very undifferentiated in the fetal environment and becoming more differentiated over time. In other words, as they mature, when we're born, maybe they're more effective than they can, because most of the cells in the fetal environment are not terribly mature whatsoever. So we have that capability for growth, and we all see that, and a lot of it is triggered chemically by various outrushes of hormones, and when you get to that endocrine, and most of that is AP2. You should be getting the idea that AP1 is all about the structure and some function, where AP2 is more about the function and some structure. And that'd be the best way to describe it to you. And that's why they're both interesting to teach. I love teaching them. I personally like AP1 better because it's bones and joints, and that's like my favorite thing to do in nervous system. Okay. And responsiveness, we respond to stimuli, period. We respond differently to stimuli. Sometimes we respond appropriately or inappropriately. Some people you hear about anger management issues. Some people just, respond inappropriately to stimuli. Some people have a short fuse. Some people don't respond particularly rapidly. There's a lot of variation, but we all respond. And then movement, changing positions, great. Metabolism. Again, I like it better when we talk about, as we'll see, building things and breaking, either storing energy or releasing energy for various purposes. If you want to get technical about it, okay, when we talk about respiration is a complicated term. We wouldn't use it this way, definition of respiration on a pulmonary basis is taking in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. It's more about getting rid of waste products and bringing in a new supply of oxygen, which is essential for us to do energy transformation. Most of the respiration, if you're going to talk about making energy, which is a poor way to say it, because understand, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It's a rule of chemistry and a rule of physics. It can only be changed or transformed. Every time you transform it, we lose some of the energy and it's released as heat. So even an efficient organism like us, comparatively speaking, when we ingest our principal energy source, which is carbohydrates, we only are able to convert 40% of it to energy. The other 60% we lose as heat. And we're very efficient. So that's a poor way of saying it. Respiration on a cellular basis, where we do those energy transformations, we release the oxygen to the cells, we pick up the carbon dioxide. So it's not, I think that's a poor way to express it. So I wouldn't use it, but again, I'm trying to clarify it. Digestion and absorption are not interchangeable terms. Do not use them so. When we digest, we're bringing in nutrients. We break them down by a series of mechanical changes and chemical changes till they're in the smallest possible thing. You and I, let's say we ingest, we have a protein-based meal, whatever, a steak, tofu, whatever. I want to apply to both carnivores and to vegans. Love tofu. I cook. I have vegans, vegetarians, gluten-free, dairy-free. mean, when we make a turkey at Thanksgiving, we also make a tofu. We make a tofam. You've had tofurkey? Oh, you're not missing anything. I want that bird, baby. So, nevertheless, so it's the distinction is absorption is when you actually bring it into your system. Circulation is straightforward, and whatever left over we excrete. And I mean, this is pretty straightforward, tough. We got to have water, 60 to 70% water. Okay, intracellular and extracellular fluids. There's a distinction. The fluids are in many ways the same, and we're going to learn about this as well. I thought I might get through this day. I guess we're Friday, but it's more important to take this. You're going to learn about down the road a concept called, on this particular, what I'm referring to, iso means same. Tonicity, the relationship of stuff dissolved in water, and water is a concentration. That's what concentration is ratio. So when we're talking about these fluids inside the cell and outside, you have what's called intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. And extracellular fluid has other subsets. It also involves things like plasma in the blood, interstitial fluid, which means interstitial means in between the tissues. Pretty easy. All of that fluid has the same tonicity. However, different chemical composition. You have more potassium in your cells, okay, proportionately, than you have sodium, which is in the exterior. But because proportions of all the contents are similar and very close to identical, we doesn't make fluids don't get pushed out or pushed in. It's like we'll talk about it. It's like somebody overly hydrating themselves can do themselves damage, or overly dehydrating themselves, because you can literally cause fluids to move. That's why you're very careful. And in the emergency room or in the hospital, we always try to use something, and we have to put fluids in, and we can tweak a little bit. We want the base to be isotonic. Comment one for that? Anybody? This doctor shows. I hope you're watching. Normal saline. Sterile normal saline. What makes it normal is isotonic. 0.85 grams % of salt in there. We'll go into that. You're so excited. I just see you looking at that. We'll do hypotonic and hypertonic and isotonic. We'll talk, and so it's all there. We'll talk endlessly about food. I have my two presets, okay, are food shows and sports shows. That way I can figure out what I'm going to cook for, like, a football game, or the soccer match, or whatever, hockey game. It doesn't matter. Sports a whole. And oxygen releases energy from food. You're going to see when we get into metabolic scheme and how things work. Oxygen, we need oxygen basically to break down. We go into a process, we need water and oxygen very, very much in all of these processes. This just shows the difference between them. Terms that you're going to have to become familiar with down the road. Inside the cell, in the tissues, plasma is another one of these fluids. If there were changes in that tonicity, fluid would be flying from place to place. It'd be a big problem. And we do see that problem, by the way, particularly in episodes of malnutrition, okay? Because the liver can't make proteins and the water extravasates. It means it gets out of the blood vessels because they're porous at the capillary level, and big, big trouble. I mean, when you see tragedy like that in war-torn countries, natural disasters and famines and all that type of stuff, unfortunately. Heat, okay, typically we utilize this. We'll go into how that works from a standpoint of homeostasis, okay, plays a role in metabolic reactions. The warmer our bodies are inside, the faster we get things done. That's why having a fever is not necessarily a bad thing. to start. When fever doesn't go away when it should, fever is part of something, a magical process that we all heal from called inflammation. From a doctor, from a medical professional perspective, we understand the fever is there. If the fever breaks, now we got a pretty good idea that good things are going to start. Because what happens, it accelerates healing processes. It accelerates cell reproduction. It accelerates the immune system being active. So we need a boost to fight that. It's going into overdrive, so to speak. Okay? Partly controls the rate of metabolic reactions. That's what body temperature, pressure. We'll talk about the pressure. The atmospheric versus the hydrostatic is very, very important when we start talking about circulation and respiration. Okay, and all of this is going to be on homeostasis. So I will spare you starting receptors and control centers and set points and negative and positive feedback and conclude that chapter with that on Friday. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Busy writing lab reports. For those who haven't had lab, bon chance.